Story 1. My high school sweetheart never existed. My high school years were amazing. Sports and grades have come to me naturally, but I always struggled with one thing: women. As a senior in high school, I never got to experience the pleasures of having a girlfriend, and I wish it stayed that way. Lana was perfect. Her almond-shaped hazel eyes and her wolf cut were the first to catch my attention. I remember her walking into the classroom and greeting our teacher. She was beautiful. My teacher must have seen me eyeing her down because the seating arrangement he gave her was the seat next to mine. The first words she ever said to me were, "Hey dude." It took me a minute to register, but I eventually responded with a quick hi. From there, we hit it off and became friends. I did my best to get her adjusted to the school and even helped her with schoolwork. Soon, we became class partners and finally broke the ice. Study sessions were where I got to know her more. She had the same energy as I did. She liked my jokes and I liked hers. She told me how she came from another school because of her parents' work and really appreciated my company. As time progressed, we hung out more outside of school. Often, we would get food or watch movies, but only as friends. She didn't really talk to too many people, so I appreciated having her all to myself. She eventually became my best friend, and the more we talked, the more I realized how much I liked her. As homecoming was near, we decided to go as a couple. I couldn't believe that she said yes and couldn't wait for the big night. This is where it all went wrong. As the day of homecoming approached, I grew anxious. This was the furthest I've gone with any girl. The first 3 years of high school were lonely. I always went to homecoming with a group of guy friends. Many of them congratulated me on the achievement. My mom was very proud and made sure I was ready. As the day of homecoming arrived, I was ready. My mother rented us a limo and bought me a brand new suit just for the special occasion. I called Lana before heading to her house to pick her up. She told me just how excited she was, and vice versa. Finally arriving at her house, I knocked on her door. No response. After a few minutes, I called her. No answer. I decided that she might be in the backyard, so I crossed over through the side like I usually do. After knocking on the back door, I was relieved to hear the voice of Lana's father. "Who is it?" Lana's father opened the door with a confused look. "Can I help you?" he asked. I stated that it was me and I was here to pick Lana up. I told her parents I could pick her up ahead of time, so I was confused at the question. Her father just stared at me like I was crazy. "I think you have the wrong house, of course." I persisted and asked if this was some sort of joke. I remember seeing another figure walking towards the door. It was Lana's mom. She seemed very relaxed and approached the door stating, "We don't have a daughter." I was dumbfounded. After a good minute of arguing and persisting, Lana's father told me to leave. I hesitated, thinking that they might have disapproved of me being their daughter's date. But they grew more and more aggressive. Finally accepting my fate, I stumbled across the steps as I hurried to the car. I could already feel my eyes tear up as I realized I was stood up. Why did she ghost me? Why did she tell her parents to act like us holes? Did I do something wrong? I had so many questions. Questions that were never answered. I lived in a relatively small town. Everyone knew each other. So when everyone claimed that this Lana girl never existed, I nearly lost it. After I went home from the incident, I cried to my mom about what happened. She looked very confused and asked me who I was talking about. I was sobbing. I told her it wasn't the time for a joke and I needed someone to talk to, but she continued asking me who I was talking about. Just like Lana's parents, I stood my ground. But the same thing happened. She forgot. It got so bad that I had to pull out my phone and show her a picture of her. Except she wasn't there anymore. Not a single trace of her was left on my phone. Her pictures, videos, and messages were all gone. Our old Instagram posts together were non-existent. Most importantly, her number, which I memorized by heart, never existed. Was I dreaming? The girl that I was talking to for over half a year never existed. Did no one believe me? Or did everyone forget? That was 20 years ago. With no one to talk to or believe in me, I moved on. I later moved for college and did other things with my life. Eventually, I met my wife. She is the love of my life. We have 2 healthy boys and another one on the way. I have a decent job and a happy life. My wife Emily stays home to take care of the kids, since my work is enough to support the whole family. We often go to parenting sessions together. We weren't certain if we would be able to juggle another child, and marriage has been hard, so we decided to learn how to have a balance. It was going great. Until last week, December 2nd, 2023. It's been 2 decades since I last saw her, and that's why I'm writing this diary. I almost forgot about her after all these years. But I saw her. After our parenting session, Emily and I went to get lunch. We ate at one of those restaurants with an outside cafe. The table we sat at was adjacent to the sidewalk which pedestrians walked on. As I waited for Emily to come back from the restroom, I noticed one of the pedestrians at a distance. I wasn't able to immediately recognize her, but I knew she looked familiar. The closer she got, the more I was certain. It was her. It was Lana. She didn't age as much as I did. She looked about 30-ish and still had the same type of haircut and eye color. I couldn't believe my eyes. I don't know why, but I was scared, like she was going to do something to me. However, she seemed unaware, like she didn't see me and just kept walking. My eyes followed her as she walked down the street, eventually turning a corner. I wanted to follow her, but my wife was coming back. I thought I was hallucinating, but I was certain it was her. When we went home, I couldn't sleep. For 20 years, everyone I've talked to about Lana never believed me. It got so bad I started to think I made it all up, a way to cope with the loneliness I was facing in high school. But I was certain. I saw her. January 12th, 2024. I have been skipping parenting sessions with my wife because of my busy New Year work schedule. My wife has been going alone and tending to the kids a lot more. She's been doing it well. However, she recently talked to me about a new friend she made at the class. Her name is Lana. This is probably insignificant, but I haven't heard that name in a while. What really stirred me was the way my wife described her. I was a bit shaky, but reassured myself it couldn't be her, since it's a relatively common name. She will be coming over for dinner in a week, so I will have my suspicions answered soon. January 19th, 2024. I don't know where to begin. I sat in the living room scared for the worst, so when my wife opened the door to the sound of Lana greeting us, I nearly passed out. It was like seeing a ghost, a mere dream from 20 years ago. My wife introduced us and quickly sat us down at the dinner table. I remained reserved. I did my best to control my emotions, not speaking for the entire dinner other than a few yeahs or no's. Lana actually seemed interested in me and was getting along with my wife very much. I didn't know how to feel. She was real. Right here, in front of me. After bottling my emotions, I finally built up the courage for confrontation. Do you remember me? I asked Lana. Both my wife and Lana turned to me confused. Sorry, I remember her asking. In high school. Senior year? I asked again, this time a little bit more demanding. Lana looked confused. My wife was surprised. You knew Lana? I didn't answer. I never really told anyone about Lana after I moved to college and didn't think it was important to bring up with Emily. I just looked at Lana. I wanted her to say something. Anything. But she didn't, keeping the puzzled look on her face. You disappeared, I said aggressively. My wife started getting tense, unaware why I was so persistent. Lana also started getting uncomfortable. I could just tell by the way she looked at me. There was no remorse behind those eyes. It's like she forgot, or never knew. Either way, the rest of the dinner was extremely uncomfortable. I excused myself from the table, and currently I am in my room writing this entry. Lana just left. My wife had a lot of questions. She was mad about how unwelcoming I was, but after explaining everything, she understood. It's been a very long time since I've told someone about the high school incident. My wife was very skeptical at first. Since I had no proof of knowing Lana in high school, she didn't believe me. It was only when I started telling her specific details about Lana that she started believing. I told her about her parents and a few other experiences that I'm not comfortable sharing. Emily told me she wanted to avoid Lana at parenting sessions, which is understandable, so we decided to quit the program. Emily was confused. How could someone just disappear? We decided to Google her name. There was almost nothing about her online other than a few work-related profiles. We spent 2 hours doing this with no results. My wife told me that it was getting late, so we're giving up for now. February 3rd, 2024. It's been a month and life has been as usual. We decided to stop going to parenting sessions. Since then, we haven't seen or talked to Lana. Because of that, this will probably be my last entry. I think it's best to leave it that way. We have our theories. My wife thinks she might be a ghost, but I think this is something else. But either way, I'm done worrying. It's been years, and I think it's time to stop thinking about her. This is goodbye for now. February 25th, 2024. I can't sleep tonight. I got a few hours in, but I woke up from a bad dream again. This is the second time. I didn't feel like writing an entry the first time, since I figured it must have been just a dream, but this one was unusual to say the least. In the dream, I saw my wife. She was far, but I could tell it was her. I started drifting towards it, unable to do anything but watch. She was smiling, with her arms wide open motioning me to come to her. I felt happy and at peace staring into her eyes. It was like when I first met her. I knew she was perfect. She started speaking. I love you. I wanted to say it back, but couldn't. This was a lucid dream, but I couldn't control myself. She kept saying it. I love you. I love you. I love you. But then her voice started deforming, like she was choking. She kept staring at me. Her hands were bound at her sides, and her eyes stayed locked onto mine. I love you. I love you. I love you. She kept going. But I couldn't take it. She was choking on something. Each gasp for air ended with an I love you. A red fluid then started trickling out her mouth. Blood? I didn't know, but now she wasn't talking anymore. Her hands were on her throat, gasping for air. I couldn't do anything. I wanted to wake up, for it to end. But I could only watch. It all happened so fast. She was now on the floor, spasming and fighting for her life. I was yelling on the inside, but still unable to move. Her eyes, they were still looking into mine. Her head stayed in place, but her body shook uncontrollably. Until she stopped. I thought she was dead. I wanted to yell, to scream, to see if she's okay. But I couldn't. Her lifeless body rested on the floor. It was pure silence. All I could do was look at her corpse and couldn't take action. I prayed that she would get up, but no one heard me. Her eyes were still open. They were now rolled back. I could only see the whites of them, but her head was still facing me. I didn't know how to react. I was shaken to the core. I stared at her body for a few minutes. It was all I could do. But suddenly, she started moving again. It was like she came back to life. Her eyes rolled back to the front of her head. I could hear her joints snap, crackle, and pop back into place. She then got up and started walking towards me. I was ecstatic. I thought I lost her and was beyond relieved. But something was wrong. She was smiling, the smile you get from a funny joke. As she walked toward me, she scanned my body up and down. My wife now stood right in front of me. It's almost like nothing happened, like she didn't just die and come back. Something was off. She started laughing. No, she started howling. An uncontrollable howl, like the Joker. I was so confused. Until she started peeling her face off. First, she started with the top. Gripping the middle of her scalp, she grabbed her own hair and tugged each side downwards. She was now hysterical, laughing so hard I could barely hear the sound of her scalp ripping open. Her skin started ripping downwards towards her nose. I could see her skull now. Blood was everywhere, covering her face and body. But she kept going. She was now at her eye level. Her face looked like a peeled tomato with two bulging eyes sticking out of it. I couldn't bear the sight, but finally she stopped laughing. "I love you," she whispered. I wouldn't even wish what I saw next on my worst enemy. She yanked the skin she ripped off and threw the long pieces on the ground. She then looked me in the eyes and laid down. I wanted it to end. I couldn't watch this anymore. She then curled up into a fetal position, like an embryo. Her body turned white. Not white as in pale, but white as in Voldemort white. Her clothes disintegrated, but her body was smooth. Its features were all gone, like a human morph suit. She started spasming again, but this time she wasn't talking. The two pieces of skin seemingly disappeared. I couldn't fathom what was happening. Her body was transforming. After a brief moment, features started returning. I could see a face again, breasts and hair. But it wasn't my wife. As her face started setting back in, and her hair started growing back, I knew who it was. She started getting up, with her hands covering her privates. A smile grew on her face. A sinister smile. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. "Miss me?" Lana asks. I finally woke up. It was finally over. I was sweating like a dog in summer heat when I jumped out of my bed. The time was 3 o'clock in the morning. I had only got a few hours of sleep. I quickly checked to see if my wife was okay. She was sleeping soundly. I've been replaying the dream in my head over and over. Even though it was just a dream, I told Emily how scared I felt. I have so many questions. Something tells me this isn't going to be the last time. For now, I'm going to take tomorrow off from work and relax. Maybe I just haven't been getting enough sleep. March 1st, 2024. The dreams haven't stopped. They've been mostly the same. My wife dies and Lana comes out of nowhere to scare the shit out of me. I started using melatonin to get better sleep, but it only made the dreams worse. We visited a sleep specialist yesterday, and he told us the problem could be within my subconscious. He told us the best way to solve the issue is to find and face the issue. Of course, I already knew the issue. It was Lana. I still had so many questions that were lingering within. How has she returned? We haven't talked to or seen her since the night of the dinner, so we decided to attend another parenting session to find her. Of course, she wasn't there. I wasn't very surprised, but my wife assured me we would find her eventually. As of now, we have had zero luck. March 3rd, 2024, still no luck. We've gone to sessions every day for the past couple days and haven't seen her. We asked the staff if they have seen her, but they told us she stopped coming about the time that we stopped as well. My wife thought this was a coincidence, but this is nothing new to me. The dreams have been getting worse, and I fear for my own health. I have been consistently waking up in the middle of the night, sweating and yelling. I need to fix this soon. March 5th, 2024. It's currently a.m. I had another shitty dream. Usually, I would be bound to something, unable to talk, and forced to watch my wife die while Lana appears. I was already used to the routine. It sounds messed up, but I've grown used to seeing my wife die in the worst ways possible. So far, she's ripped her own skin off, set herself ablaze, and shot herself in the head. I hated every minute of it, but I've become desensitized. Lana would always appear shortly after Emily died. I didn't understand why, since I never thought about Lana on a daily basis. But this one was different. Emily cut her stomach open and spilled her guts over the floor. Nothing unique, but this time Lana had walked in early. She didn't appear from Emily's corpse like she sometimes did, but she rather walked in from outside of my view. This time she approached Emily, still bleeding to death, and gave her a kiss on the cheek. Shortly after, Emily was lifeless, and Lana turned her head towards me, like she usually did. She walked over to me and started smiling, like she usually did. But this time she touched me. She touched my lips, circling between the top and bottom. But that wasn't the part that concerned me. I could feel it. It was only a dream, I told myself, but I knew this was different. She read me, like she was staring into my soul, like she knew what I was thinking. I didn't know how to react. I couldn't. I wanted to die at that moment. Until she said the words, "See you soon," and gave me a light shove. That's all I could remember. I woke up, and now I am writing this entry. I woke my wife up and told her what happened as well. Now we both can't sleep and seriously don't know what to do. My wife has booked me an appointment for the physiatrist tomorrow. I think it's for the best. March 5th, 2024, Part 2, Holy Fuck. After my wife booked me an appointment for tomorrow, we decided to watch a movie. We couldn't sleep and didn't know what else to do. About halfway through the movie, I heard a tap on one of the living room windows. It sounded like a rock. I ignored it, too wary to check, but another tap came shortly after. This time both my wife and I went to check. Peering out the window, we couldn't see anything since it was too dark. I didn't know what to do, feeling like a child, wanting to stay in the safety of my home. My wife told me to not worry, and how it was probably a couple of pranksters up late at night. But a couple seconds later, there was a loud banging on our back door. I feared for the worse. I grabbed my shotgun from the bedroom safe. I've never had to use it before. My wife said I was overreacting, but after experiencing the dream, I was not taking risks. Shaking in fear, I headed toward the back door and told my wife to stay behind me. I turned on the backyard lights and listened for sound. It was super quiet since it was late at night, but I still didn't hear anyone in the yard. After a few minutes of waiting by the door, I finally got the courage to prop it open and check to see what was there. Of course, there was nothing unusual. The backlight dimly revealed the backyard, illuminating the barbecue grill and the silhouette of two trees. Other than that, I saw nothing else. To reaffirm my safety, I hesitantly called out, "Anyone there?" My wife was clutching my hand behind me, but I was confident no one was there. Until someone replied, "I'm here." At first, I thought it was our elderly neighbor. But this voice was younger and higher pitched. This voice was familiar. My wife instantly jumped back. I think she realized before I did. It was Lana. I couldn't see her at first, but I knew. Her shadow was hiding under one of the trees. I only saw it when it started moving towards me. A dark shadow hovered on the ground, slowly edging its way toward my wife and I. I immediately raised my gun, realizing there was nothing I could see that was making the shadow. Its shape narrowed as it shifted from the light. It was moving by itself. It finally stopped about 10 feet away from us. The shadow then grew bigger, about as wide as a sewer plate. I pointed my gun at the thing, but I didn't know what I was aiming at. Before I could think, a hand appeared from the void. It reached for the grass and started pulling itself out. Along came an arm, then a head, and then a full body. The figure had long hair and tattered clothes. Its skin was rotten, like a corpse. My wife quickly pulled out her phone and called the police. I was now face to face with the thing, with my gun as the only protection I had. After taking a closer look, I recognized her. It was Lana, but her body seemed semi-decomposed, like she was a zombie. She just stood there, menacingly. I wanted to shoot, but I couldn't. There was nothing behind those eyes. Her face rose and met mine. Then she lifted her arm towards me, reaching for my face. Her dry and cracked lips started moving, with only a groan coming out of her mouth. My wife, who was still behind me, told me that the police would be here soon. I didn't hear her, hyper-fixated on Lana's next move. Lana was unresponsive, like a statue, but then she started moving. I could see her plant her foot into the ground, ready to charge. "Don't do it," I warned her, but she ignored me and started rushing. My wife screamed, seeing the sudden movement of Lana. She was fast. So fast that I almost didn't pull the trigger. My shotgun sent Lana flying. Bits of her body flew through the air as blood spewed everywhere, like a pinata. The sight was gruesome. I stood there, realizing I had just shot someone. The sirens of the police were now only a few houses away, and I turned to tell my wife to get them. But she must have already gone to tell the police what happened. As I was waiting, I moved closer to the remains of Lana. I wanted to have closure, to make sure it was over. But when I approached the body, I noticed something wrong. The hair was different. This wasn't Lana's hair. This was my wife's. I flipped the body over only to see my dead wife's face, eyes still open, with a look of horror. I shot my wife. I could hear the police breaking down the front door, but I didn't know what to do. In the heat of the moment, my legs started moving, running. I ran across the backyard and jumped over the fence to my neighbor's yard. Then the next yard, and then the next. I ran until sunrise. I am currently staying at a friend's house 30 miles away from home. My kids. I can't go back. There will be a hunt for me soon. What have I done? March 8th, 2024, the dreams are still here and have become a lot worse. I fear for my children, but there's nothing I can do. The police are on a search for me. I thought about turning myself in, but I couldn't do it. I stayed at a friend's house for a couple nights until the bounty for me was released. I can't sleep at all anymore, but I know what I saw that night. Lana was there. This might be the only documentation I have of Lana's existence, but I want the world to know. For me, this is the end. I refuse to live like this. I'm currently at the top of a skyscraper, and I think I'm gonna jump. I don't know if I'm gonna go through with this, but I will update y'all if I don't. This is me signing off now. Goodbye. Story 2. A school lockdown is happening. The intruder isn't human. It was a normal and boring day of school, as always. I was in the biology class picking some stuff for the teacher when the principal spoke. All teachers must lock their classroom doors. Stay quiet and turn off your lights. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Now, when I heard him, I really thought it was a school lockdown drill, since we did a lot of those in the previous years, but something in his voice told me it really wasn't a drill. So, as I was away from my classroom, I left the teacher's things there and left the classroom quietly. I started heading to my class, and when I got there, I quietly knocked on the door. "Hey, Mrs. Rose. It's me, Toby. Can I please come in?" "I don't want to meet the intruder. I'm sorry, Toby, but I can't let you in." The principal called, and he said to not let anyone in or out. Mrs. Rose was a lady in her mid-40s, married with one kid. She was the sweet type that would give out candy to her students at the end of the year, but she also held her positions very well, and I knew she would not give in. I left, thinking about where to go, and the school's generator room popped in my head. Since my school was kinda big, it was fairly far away. I started heading that way when I heard someone behind me. It was a police unit. I didn't even know they were called. Lucky me, I guess, huh? Nope. "Hey, kid, you know there is someone bad out here, right?" "Yes, officer." But I was at the bathroom when it happened. I wasn't going to give him a full-on explanation of how I got in this situation. "Well, did you?" He didn't even finish his phrase when some humanoid creature appeared behind him and slashed his head off. I was paralyzed. It must have been at least 6, 7. It was naked, no hair anywhere on its body, and it had big, round, black eyes. When its eyes locked on me, it let out a loud scream, and it charged at me. I barely dodged it. This thing is extremely fast, I thought. I started running the other way, which was luckily the way to the generator room. That thing, I don't even know what to call it, started running after me. It almost got me when I suddenly turned a corner which caught it off guard and had to turn around and come after me again. I was already halfway down the hall. I will not make it to the generator room in time, I thought to myself. I turned another corner, the thing about 10 meters back, catching up quick. I entered a bathroom and quickly ran in the farthest stall. I heard a voice. "Who is that?" I recognized that voice as my classmate, Duncan. I always hated this guy. Bully type, dumb as hell. All the stereotypes of a high school bad boy. "It's Toby." "Now shut up. There is some creature out there," I said quietly. "What creature are you talking about?" Right as he spoke, I heard the bathroom door open, and the thing started searching for me. It heard Duncan's voice, and it probably thought it was me, hiding from it. It started opening the stalls one by one, and luckily I was in the last one, just after Duncan. When it got to Duncan, I heard him yell a "what the fuck," and then let out a horrified scream. It killed Duncan. Even though I hated Duncan, I still felt bad for him, dying to this creature. After it killed Duncan, it left in search for more kills. After I stopped hearing its steps, I left the stall too and looked out the bathroom to see which way it went. I saw it turn a corner towards the principal's office, which was the way I need to go to get to the generator room. It's better going in an empty classroom, I thought to myself. I didn't see it check any classrooms anyway, so why would it? I searched for an empty classroom, and it was the chemistry laboratory. I locked the door after me. The lights were already off. I headed to the closet. Everyone hides in closets, right? Yes, everyone does, because when I opened the door to the closet, some girl almost hit me with a mop, but she stopped just in time. She was a classmate from elementary school. What is going on out there? Who is making the screams I heard? She asked, very confused. There is some kind of creature out there. It killed Duncan and a police officer, I said to her. She had a puzzled look on her face. What creature? And Duncan is dead? She said, panic evident in her voice. I don't know what it is, but it almost killed me too, so let's hide until we can safely leave, I said. I looked through the keyhole and saw that thing pass. I stumbled back, and it stopped dead in its tracks. It headed my way as it heard me fall. I took Emma's hand and quickly entered the closet with her, just as the thing broke the door down. Emma let out a fearful breath, but I covered her mouth and signed her to shut up. The thing stopped and looked around, and when it wandered its eyes towards the closet, I thought we were dead, but it kept walking. It looked around for a good 5 minutes, then it left. What the fuck is that? Emma asked. I don't really know. I was in the biology lab when I heard the principal. I started going towards my classroom, and since that stubborn Mrs. Rose did not let me in, I wanted to go to the generator room. On my way there, I saw a police officer, and he spoke to me. I told him I was in the bathroom, and then that creature killed him. I ran from it, and somehow I got a lead and hid in a bathroom. Duncan was there, and this thing came in and killed him. After that, I came here and found you. This all that happened to me until now. Wow. I can't believe Duncan is dead. Didn't really like him, but I still felt bad, I guess, she said, still taking in all I had to say. Yeah, me neither. He was such an asshole to everybody. Okay, so do we wait it out and see what happens? Emma said, not much hope in her voice. Well, I guess that's what we do. Story 3. I attended my high school's 10-year reunion. There's something terribly wrong with the rest of my graduating class. There's a saying in my hometown, nobody leaves Copperhill for good. For years, I'd mostly managed to defy it. In the decade that followed my graduation from Copperhill High School, I hardly set foot in its vicinity. Instead, I absorbed myself in my studies at an out-of-state university, and eventually, my career. I spent the little free time I had with my girlfriend, who I'd met as a sophomore in a chemistry lab, and her friends. When we eventually broke up, I lost not only her, but also what little social life I had. It was in this state of loneliness that I found a letter from my old high school in the mail. This surprised me, as I hadn't realized that anyone there even knew my current mailing address. I opened the envelope to find an invitation inside. Its design was fancier than I'd expected, complete with gold-colored glitter, a royal blue background, and a finely drawn silver border. It read, in cursive letters, Cheers for 10 years. Zachary R. Please join us for the CHIS Class of 2013 official reunion. It went on to list a start time and the school's address. On its back, it even contained a personalized handwritten note. I know you live far away, Zach, but it would mean so much to me if you can make the trip. Paul and I will be there, and Arthur may fly in as well. I'd love to catch up. Hope to see you soon, Vince K., co-chair, CHIS Reunion Planning Committee. Vince had been one of my best friends once. You see, Copperhill is one of those rare small towns where you can easily graduate from high school alongside the same friends you first made in kindergarten, in my case, my buddies Arthur, Paul, and Vince. I'd spent most of my youth with them. The four of us were in the same scout troop, played on the same sports teams, and took mostly the same classes. On weekends and on weeknights, when we felt like sneaking out without permission, we often stayed up late together playing video games and drinking whatever cheap beer we managed to keep hidden from our parents. We'd meant so much to each other once. So why, since graduation, had I neglected them so badly? I couldn't even remember the last time I'd talked to any of them. Perhaps this reunion could serve as an opportunity for me to reignite friendships I'd let fade. At a minimum, I knew that spending time even just one evening with my old pals would do me a lot of good, especially considering how lonely I'd been lately. Accordingly, I resolved to attend. By the time I reached Copper Hill, I was an hour behind schedule due to congestion caused by an accident. As I approached town, I observed amidst the fading evening light that it appeared even quieter and more deserted than I remembered. Bars that had reliably drawn decent crowds on a Friday night ranged from boarded up to barely occupied. Meanwhile, the few other cars on the street drove lethargically at speeds far below the limit, and I spotted no pedestrians. In my memory, the school was only a short distance from the courthouse, city hall, and post office that formed most of downtown, but my GPS took me down a long, unfamiliar route bordered on both sides by tall cornfields. I was about to pull over and double-check the address I'd entered when, sure enough, my headlights illuminated a sign in the school's distinct black and red colors that stated, "Chis, home of the Patriots." The brick building that loomed behind it was just as I remembered, from its tall, towering middle section to the two narrower wings that stretched out to the left and right. Through the rectangular windows that lined the main building, I made out indistinct, shadowy figures milling about inside. A banner displaying Welcome 10 Years Chis Reunion stretched over the stairs that led to the main entrance. Underneath it, a familiar figure scurried towards the main entrance. "Arthur," I said to myself with a smile. Seeing Arthur improved my mood. He was the only other member of our class to leave town after graduation, and I suspected that he might share somewhat of an outsider status with me. "It'll be just like old times," I reassured myself as I approached the building. Strangely, though, it still didn't feel that way. For one, the air had a staleness to it that was difficult to describe. It felt artificial and thin, such that, as I climbed the front steps, I found myself needing to breathe in more of it than usual to avoid getting winded. Plus, the school's location still seemed off somehow. It didn't make any sense. It's not like a building this large could have been relocated. But amidst the eerily quiet surrounding countryside, everything felt more isolated and remote than I remembered it being. I tried to stop worrying. After all, with any luck, I'd soon be laughing and reminiscing with old friends who'd be happy to see me. Inside, balloon garlands, multicolored streamers, triangle flags, and small banners welcoming attendees decorated the main corridor. I observed tables stocked with snacks, pamphlets, and information about fundraisers. The only noise came from the intercom, which planned an era-appropriate Calvin Harris song. Everything necessary for a reunion was there, with only one notable exception: the people. As I approached an unmanned table marked "Check-in," I wondered where everybody had gone. Perhaps the event had moved to a different room? I was late, after all. As I added my signature to a sign-in sheet, my eyes scanned the list of other attendees who were marked as having already arrived. I recognized many names on it, like Alice, who'd shared a stand with me in orchestra. Our conductor was a hard-ass, a real disciplinarian who snapped at us constantly, and Alice was one of the many students he'd driven to tears on a semi-regular basis. I'd had this petty fantasy of comforting her after class, and then mustering the courage to ask her out. But I never did it. It was Vince, actually, who'd ended up with her. That had always annoyed me. I'd confided in Vince about how I felt about Alice, and soon after, the two of them were together. It felt as frustrating as it sounds. But oh well, that's what I get for hesitating for as long as I did. Drifting down the hallway, my eyes caught the words "reception" displayed over double doors that led to the gymnasium. It made sense as the main location for the event. That's where homecoming, prom, and plenty of major sports events were held, after all. I could hear chatter, laughter, and the loud thump of dance music just beyond the gym doors. I approached it excitedly. But when I stepped inside, all the noise instantly cut out, leaving me in an eerie silence. Even more perplexingly, the room before me, like the entrance corridor, was entirely devoid of people. A party had just been here, no doubt. I spotted a makeshift bar stocked with a standard assortment of liquor, tables holding half-finished drinks and refreshments, and an area cleared for a dance floor in the room's center, but there were no people around. Had I missed everyone again? Where had they gone? "Hello," I called out, to no avail, as I drifted around the room in a state of bewilderment. As I did so, I came across the entrance to the boys' locker room. Just a whiff of the musty, sweaty smell emanating from it unlocked long-buried memories of the time I'd spent in there. I remembered one occasion in particular where Paul had gotten pissed at me. Paul was usually a pretty low-key guy, but when he lost it, he went wild. On that particular occasion, he'd been angry with me, hadn't he? But why? I recalled his hot breath as he got in my face and screamed at me. When I gently nudged him away, he responded by slamming a locker door into my head. My memories from that moment forward were hazy. There was a growing pool of blood, the pain of his fist against my cheek, and the cheering of the classmates who had encircled us. They were egging us on to continue the fight, as if my beating could be called that. I hadn't thought about this event in years. How could I have forgotten something like that? My mind churned in confusion. Feeling dizzy, I took a seat on a bench that appeared to be part of a crude photo booth setup as my mind continued to replay this repressed memory. As Paul had continued to pummel me, I'd spotted Vince among the gathered crowd. I'd begged for him to intervene, but neither he nor our strangely absent instructor had done anything to help me. It was only when Arthur got between us that Paul had reluctantly cooled off. It had taken weeks for those bruises to heal. Had Paul ever been punished for it, or even apologized? Surely he must have. We'd remained friends after all. A strange pressure around my shoulder and a sudden bright light jolted me back to the present. The flash on the camera facing the bench I was sitting on had gone off somehow, even with nobody around to operate it. How was that possible? Maybe it was automated to go off every so often. It didn't make sense, just like so much else that was happening. Where was everybody, and whose voices had I been hearing? I'd seen people from the road, and I'd even watched Arthur come inside, but as far as I could tell, the event was deserted. I texted Arthur asking if he'd found anyone. For all I knew, he could have changed his number in the many years that had gone by since I'd last used it, but I figured it was worth a shot. To my relief, he responded right away. "Hey man, long time no see. Paul just called me. He says everyone's up on the third floor, in Mr. Minnelli's old room. I'm on my way there now. Meet you there soon." I couldn't fathom why the entire event would relocate from the area clearly designated for it to the third floor. There wasn't much up there after all, aside from classrooms and a few administrative officers. Nonetheless, I resolved to head up there. Arthur was there after all, and hopefully the rest of my friends would be as well. Navigating off my memory of the building's layout, I hopped up a small set of steps that connected the gym to the second floor. From there, it would just be a short walk past a few classrooms before I'd arrive at the central staircase, which would take me to my destination. I'd never seen the school quite this gloomy before. Each footstep echoed through the halls. The classrooms were weirdly empty too, bereft of any decorations or other signs of use. I recognized one as my calculus classroom. I remembered how, after class had ended one day, I'd come across a group of students congregating in the hallway. Mary, Michelle, and Abby, like so many of my classmates, had grown up with me, and I'd always gotten along with them. But that day, they were harassing a shy girl Morgan, I think, calling her all sorts of names: slut, whore, bitch. She was trying to get away from them, but they wouldn't let her leave. Their taunting of her became a regular thing, and it often left Morgan in tears. Whatever happened to Morgan? Like most of my friends, I'd known her since I was a little kid. She was quiet, but she was perfectly nice. Then, one day, gossip about her started to spread. The type of nasty, embellished rumors that often make their way through high schools, full of sexist undertones and double standards. Her former friends shunned her, and she'd been subjected to taunting and ridicule as she walked to class and sat alone at lunch. And one day, she was just gone. I'd always assumed that her family had moved away, but was that true? Growing up, Mary, Michelle, and Abby had always been sweet girls. I'd never seen them treat another person the way they'd treated Morgan. But Copperhill High School had a way of bringing out the worst in people. There was just something about this building, this place, that ate away at our souls. Had I bullied Morgan too? Maybe not, but once her mistreatment started, it's not like I'd made an effort to be kind to her, or ever invited her to sit with me and my friends in the cafeteria. I could have done more. I reached the central staircase. With each step that I took up towards the third floor, a feeling of dread ran through me. I'd seen something terrible happen up here, hadn't I? It was Paul and Vince. Arthur had done something to offend them. It could have been the rumors spreading about his reasons for never having a girlfriend, his diminutive size, or the way he'd reacted when Paul had beaten me half to death. Whatever the reason, Paul and Vince, without my knowledge, had decided to subject Arthur to a cruel prank. After school one day, they'd lured Arthur up to the third floor, where they'd taken hold of him and tried to wedge him into his own locker. Now, there's a reason this sort of thing occurs primarily on 90-second sitcoms. Most people simply can't fit inside of a locker. Arthur, as short and skinny as he was, turned out to be no exception, but this only made things worse for him. As Arthur later related to me, Paul and Vince laughed rowdily as they slammed him repeatedly into the metal frame. By the time they finally relented, Arthur had bruises all over his body. There were other horrible acts, too. Other victims, other beatings. It dawned on me that this place had been an absolute hellhole. It's no wonder I and Arthur, too, had gotten as far away from it as we could at the first opportunity. The peculiar thing was that, in the years that had passed, I'd somehow forgotten all of this until just now. Instead, my recollections of high school were all happy, all positive. Had false memories of camaraderie and friendship drawn Arthur back as well? Finally, I reached the third level. The overhead fluorescent light fixtures flickered sporadically, revealing, in brief spurts, dilapidated lockers, litter, and layers of dust and dirt that coated the floor. I approached Mr. Minnelli's classroom. Through the shaded hallway window, I could discern the outlines of roughly a dozen figures inside. I heard a voice, too. It was muffled and indistinct, but I could tell that the speaker was giving some kind of speech. She stopped, and a loud round of applause followed. I reached for the door handle, unsure of what to expect. Hopefully, it would just be the people I'd driven 4 hours to see. But after the events thus far, I half expected the room to be empty. If so, I was jumping ship and going home. To my surprise, just before I made contact with it, the door slowly opened on its own. The brightly lit room before me was filled not with people, at least in the general understanding of the word. Rather, the still, bony forms before me resembled the kind of props a biology teacher might use to teach human anatomy. The skeletons that stood silently throughout the room, that stood posed with drinks, that sat at desks, and that had assembled around a speaker had to be props, right? Even though Mr. Minnelli was a history teacher? My mind searched desperately for some kind of explanation. This had to be an elaborate prank, right? Had Vince and Paul lured me, And maybe Arthur too, out here just to freak us the fuck out. I wouldn't put it past them. It's precisely the kind of thing they do, even if the whole setup, complete with an array of prop skeletons, was a bit extreme. But then, who was making all the noises I'd been hearing? Was that part of the prank too? Fuck it, I thought. If this was a big gag at my expense, then I'd just have to deal with the embarrassment later. I was getting out of there. Zach, called a strained voice in the hallway. If this a joke, then it's not. The voice interrupted me. Zach, help me, please. It was Arthur's voice, and it was coming from the hallway nearby. He sounded like he was in serious trouble, so I hurried after him. Eventually, I found myself in a corner of the hallway one where, if I remembered correctly, he and I used to have lockers. But once again, I found myself alone. I yelled out his name several times. Arthur? Arthur. It was no use. I appeared to be at a dead end. That's when the locker next to me shook. I jumped back, surprised. It was shut, but not locked. I gripped the handle and pulled it open. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw inside. It was Arthur's torso. The rest of his body was gone, and something was dragging what was left of him further away, further back into a dark abyss where the wall should have been. Blood gurgled out of his mouth as he gasped my name one last time. He reached out a red-stained hand. Hoping to somehow pull him out, I tried to take it, only for whatever unseen force had taken hold of him, to pull him away, leaving behind a wide hole in the back of the locker. More blood gushed through it, leaking onto the hallway floor. So glad you could make it, said a monotone voice behind me. I whirled around to see two fleshy arms emerge from another locker across from me. The skinless figure left wet, red stains on the white surface as she got to her feet and stepped towards me. Don't you recognize your old crush? Surely 10 years haven't been that rough on me, Alice, I stuttered, stepping backwards. Lockers all around me started opening, each accompanied by a new pair of bloody arms of figures that slowly crawled outwards. My survival instincts kicked in. I sprinted away, my legs frantically carrying me towards the main staircase. All around me, figures emerged, reaching out to me as I passed by. Through an open door, I noticed that another classroom was filled with skeletons, just as Mr. Minnelli's had been. When I reached the main staircase, it was guarded by a tall, fleshy figure. Don't you want to be with us? It asked in a familiar, deep voice that I knew to be Paul's. We can be complete. A full class. All of us together again. Like old times, he lurched for me. Just barely. I managed to dodge him, but I lost balance in the process. Before I knew it, I was tumbling down the stairs. Pain shot through me as I collided with step after step. Finally, I landed on a level surface. Dizzily, I climbed to my feet and did my best to ignore the soreness that spread throughout my body. A quick glance upwards confirmed that the bloody figures, the ones that somehow resembled my old classmates, were, indeed, heading towards me. Meanwhile, the temperature inside was rising noticeably, and the walls around me were steadily changing in color from a dull gray to a deep red. As I scrambled down the rest of the stairs and across the main corridor on the first floor, an intense tremor ran through the building, sending me sprawling to the ground. Despite a sharp pain that spread through my ankle, I hobbled as quickly as I could to the exit. I didn't look back as I made my way across the parking lot to my car. I started the ignition, backed out, and headed towards the long road I'd used to get there. In my rearview mirror, I chanced a glance back at the school. It was shaking violently, like it was being struck by an earthquake. My car lurched in different directions as the ground underneath me also started to rumble. In an effort to avoid my car being sent off the road and into the neighboring fields, I frantically steered it to the center, between the lanes heading into and out of town. When I looked back again, the school was, somehow, even closer to me than it had been before. How was that possible? Was it following me? I floored the accelerator. Row after row of cornfield flew by me as I drove at the fastest speed of my life. I was on the edge of town, close to the nearest interstate ramp, when local police pulled me over. As the officer approached me, I stared into the rear view mirror. At the first glimpse of whatever it was that had chased after me, I'd hit the road again. Law enforcement be damned. In truth, I hadn't seen my pursuer since I'd exited the cornfield a few minutes ago, but I hardly felt safe. "Clocked you going nearly 100, son," said the officer. I stayed silent. My baffled self was unsure of how to best handle the situation. The officer gave me a quizzical look as he examined my ID and registration. "You're Don and Fran's son, aren't you? The one who left town?" I nodded. "Why'd you come back?" There was a 10-year reunion. For my graduating class, he shook his head. I doubt that. He looked down, then at my perplexed face. Where, exactly, was this reunion? At the school, I said. I struggled to understand his reaction. What about my story didn't make sense? And regardless, was I about to be booked for driving 50 miles over the speed limit? Is that something they throw you in jail for? "Wait here," barked the officer. He went to his car where he proceeded to have a long conversation over his radio. After a few minutes, he returned to me. "Get out of here, son. Leave and don't come back. Don't do something like this again. You hear me?" Yeah, that's fine," I said, astonished. "Then scram," he ordered. I obliged and began the long journey home. I had no idea what to make of what occurred. I can hardly find anything at all online about Copper Hill High, or any of my classmates who went there, and I'm not exactly eager to reach out to any of them. I can't make much sense of what happened, but I am sure of one thing, that I barely made it out of that situation, and that I shouldn't press my luck much further. My ankle needs some more time to heal. Once it does, I'm going to try joining a social club and making new friends. After what happened to me in Copper Hill, I decided that the past is not a place where I need to dwell any longer. 2 weeks have passed since the reunion. Today, an envelope with no return address arrived with my mail. It contained a single photograph on glossy paper with a short note written underneath. The image featured me on the bench in the photo booth. Sitting to my side, with his arm over my shoulders, was Vince. He wore a blue collared shirt and looked normal. No missing skin, no bloody imprints on the surface around him. Paul crouched behind us, a dopey grin on his face. He, too, looked just as I'd imagined he would in his late 20s. To Paul's right, Abby, Morgan, and Michelle posed together with their arms around each other. It was a perfectly ordinary image, the exact kind of photo you'd expect to be taken at an event like that. The handwritten caption underneath read, "Although your visit was briefer than we preferred, we all had a splendid time catching up with you, Zach. Please feel free to come by any time. Nobody truly leaves Copper Hill after all. Vince K., Co-Chair, CHIS Reunion Planning Committee." The note continued. "We are delighted that Arthur has finally joined us. Maybe you will too, at our 20th. The writing up to this point was cursive font in traditional black ink. The last few words, however, were larger in size, messily scrawled, and colored a deep shade of red. "See you then, buddy, if not sooner." Story 4. At my school, there's a murder club. There were 2 types of people at Ashbourne Intermediate School, those who knew about the murder club and those who didn't. My little brother Elliot was among the people who didn't know. He was a sweet kid, an innocent sixth grader, the kind that took notes during advisory and got picked on endlessly by the jocks. On Thursday, he was sitting at an empty table in the lunchroom, reading a book while the other sixth graders had gone out for recess. I sat down next to him and set down my tray. "What you reading?" Elliot pushed up his glasses and smiled. "The 13 Problems." It was on the fall reading list. Sounds boring. I think you'd like it, actually. It's a collection of murder mysteries. I've graduated from mysteries, I said, picking up my slice of pizza. Really? What's next for you, then? I took a comically savage bite of my pizza and flashed Elliot a tomato-stained grin. "Real murder," Elliot laughed. I laughed with him. Equals 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 Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2:15 to 3 o'clock was time for club activities. Usually I would go to practice with the soccer club, but that day I had something else to do. Lingering by my locker, I tore out a sheet of notebook paper and took out a pen. I want to join the club. Ethan Trace. Being careful not to be caught by the hall monitor, I went down into the basement level and made my way over to the broom closet, where the murder club was famously rumored to meet. I folded the note and slipped it halfway through the gap under the door. After a few seconds, someone inside the broom closet took the note. I watched it slip under the door and out of sight. I felt my heart beat a little bit faster as I hurried back up the stairs and out onto the soccer field. Equals 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 after practice, I found a note taped to the inside of my locker. I unfolded it to reveal a short message in an unfamiliar handwriting. "The only way to join the club is to kill one of us. Think of it as a rite of passage." My stomach twisted at the thought of taking someone's life, a sickening thrill that I had grimly been preparing for. I clenched my fist around the note and pressed it deep into my pocket. "The game is on," I muttered. Equals 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 equals. Once you were among those who knew about the murder club, it was fairly easy enough to deduce who was in it, because they mysteriously went missing during the Tuesday and Thursday club periods, and the teachers could never find them. The one I decided would be easiest to take out was Andy Bale, the silent kid in 6th grade. He shared his lunch table with the rest of the oddball freaks in Ashbourne, either staring and smiling at nothing or toying with a deck of playing cards. Sometimes he held out the fan deck to the kid sitting next to him, as if he was going to perform a magic trick. That made some people think he was in the magic club, but I checked and his name was never on the roster. On Monday, I came to school with a packet of rat poison in my backpack. Not the stuff that came in pellets, but the pure, white powder that was dangerous to even breathe around. During lunch, I dumped the whole packet into a cup of water and swapped the cup with Andy's while he was looking away. Stupid kid, I thought to myself. It was like he didn't know I was coming after him. For the rest of the lunch period, I could hardly eat from the nauseating anticipation. I kept glancing at Andy's table, waiting for him to take a drink from his cup. "What are you looking at?" Elliot asked, peering at me quizzically. "Nothing," I said quickly. I looked back to him and noticed the bruises on his cheek. "What's that?" "Dylan Green said I was looking at Kate Michael's funny," he muttered. I clenched my fists. "Elliot, you can't keep letting people bully you," he sighed. "What do I do then?" I bit my lip. I hated Elliot's bullies. They broke his glasses, broke his nose. Sometimes the cheerleaders would even make a game of breaking his heart. I tried to help him, but that only made them tease him more, the scrawny little nerd who needed his big brother to bail him out of trouble. Elliot looked at me expectantly, with his glasses sitting crooked on his crookedly heeled nose. There wasn't anything I could tell him, but in my head, I told him to wait. Just wait until I was in the murder club. Fortunately, before the silence between us grew too long, the bustle of the lunchroom was interrupted by gagging and a loud clatter and cries of alarm. I turned my head slowly. Elliot gasped. As I directed my gaze to Andy Bale's table, I prepared a similar mock reaction of surprise. But the body on the floor wasn't Andy Bale. It was the kid who always sat next to him, Genevieve something or other, with her blonde curls splayed out on the lunchroom floor in a smear of red vomit. Andy was still in his seat, looking straight at me and grinning. I swallowed. He must have known something was in his cup, must have switched it with Genevieve's. I berated myself for thinking he was so foolish. Of course, he was ready for my move. But then, as if reading my thoughts, Andy held up his cup, still full to the brim. I looked at Genevieve's tray. She hadn't gotten a cup of water for herself, just a carton of milk that was now on the floor. Genevieve convulsed on the floor, coughing out blood-stained milk. Andy took a long drink from his cup. Then he looked back at me, smiled, and took a small flourishing bow like a magician after his act. Sirens wailed outside the windows, and the paramedics got to the lunchroom fast, but I knew how much poison I had used. Genevieve was dead. Equals, 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 equals school closed down after the incident, and Elliot told our mom and dad that maybe it was time we transferred schools, maybe to somewhere in the city. He'd brought up the topic a few times before, like when Cynthia Nakey had been found floating at the bottom of the pool a couple of months ago, when Leah Madison had keeled over last summer at the ball game, and when Ricky Blake had choked to death mid-presentation in March at the science fair. I had suggested switching schools too, back when I was smaller and more scared. It never worked. Our parents always shook their heads and told us Ashbourne was the best school in the area in that strange monotone voice, as if students being murdered on the monthly basis wasn't anything to be concerned about. As far as I could tell, all the other students' parents did the same. Nobody ever left Ashbourne. Not the students, not even the teachers. Some whispered that it was a curse. When school reopened, everyone who was alive was still there. While the ones who didn't know about the murder club tried to forget Genevieve's pale face and red eyes, the ones who knew discreetly turned their heads to the members of the club as they passed in the hallways. Their unspoken consensus was that the murder club had killed Genevieve, just like any other mysterious death that happened in Ashbourne. As for me, I opened my locker to find a new note taped up inside. We appreciate your service. Please try again. Equals, 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 equals Jasmine McCartney, in 7th grade, was simply known to some as the gardener girl. If she ever made friends, she always abandoned them in favor of tending to the garden at the back of the school during lunch recess. Some people joked that she was closer with the chickens than with humans, but those people didn't know that whenever the hens in the coop grew old, it was Jasmine who slaughtered them and made chicken soup for the gardening club. I'm sure the gardening club invited her to join many times, but she never showed up unless it was for the soup. On Monday, I waited in anticipation in the garden's shed, sweaty hands clasped around the handles of a long, rusted pair of gardening shears. Soon I began to hear footsteps coming down the gravel path. I flattened myself against the wall and tried to calm my breathing. The door creaked open. As soon as I registered Jasmine's brown hair and freckles, I lunged with all my might, and just as she turned around in surprise, sank the blades of the shears 6 inches into her stomach. Jasmine coughed. She stumbled back, and I followed her, pressing the shears deeper into her, trying to ignore the sickening squelching sound. Jasmine crashed against the shelves of gardening equipment and crumpled to the floor. Blood bubbled onto the dusty floor of the shed. Jasmine's eyes flitted up to me. "I'm sorry," I muttered through clenched teeth. "But you should have seen this coming." Jasmine's pale lips twitched. For a moment, I thought their shape resembled a smile. "Why do you want to be a part of the club?" She breathed, a shocking calmness in her raspy voice. "For Elliot," I replied. I yanked out the shears, and with one last cough, Jasmine slumped forward dead. The shed was filled with the musty scent of blood. I wiped the shears with a rag used for drying the gardening tools and grabbed a shovel so that I could bury both. When I opened the door to leave the shed, I stumbled back as I realized someone was waiting just outside. "That's a noble cause," Jasmine McCartney said, smiling. "Elliot, I mean. Such a weak soul, and so many people who love to hurt him." I gawked at her stomach that was clean of gore, at the blood-stained rag in my hand, and finally at the floor of the shed behind me. Kevin Fisher from the field hockey team lay dead on the floor, blood and guts spilling out of his stomach. His wide eyes, frozen in terror, stared back up at me. I swallowed hard and slowly turned my head to look back at Jasmine. "We appreciate your service," she said, smiling cheerily. "Please try again." In a week's time, school had reopened again. I should have stopped my antics then. I should have been warned by the strange, unexplainable way the members of the murder club danced with death, taking the lives of two innocent people in their stead. I really should have realized that the club was using those same sinister tricks to keep me around for their entertainment. When the fingerprints on the bloody shears the investigators found buried in the garden matched with Paul Trenton's instead of mine. But I couldn't stop. Not anymore. I told myself it was all for Elliot, that as a member of the murder club, I could steer the club toward targeting his bullies until my little brother was finally free. A heroic cause. But more than anything now, I just wanted to take that smug grin off of Andy Bale and Jasmine McCartney's faces. Not just that. I would give them a show. At the end of the week was the school play, a production of the first 3 acts of Julius Caesar. I planned to kill the third and final member of the murder club there. Nico Harvey was a theater kid, though he only went to after-school rehearsals and never once showed up to the theater club. He sat behind me in history class, and sometimes I could almost feel him watching me. Nico laughed like a psychopath and hummed bars of Tchaikovsky at random times, habits made even creepier by his piercing stare that never broke eye contact. Despite his unsettling disposition, in the theater, he ruled the stage, as if he actually possessed thousands of personalities and could adopt any of them, as long as it was written in a script. In the upcoming play, he would take on the role of Julius Caesar, the glorious Roman general who would be stabbed to death by 23 senators in the culmination of the play. I planned my moves much more carefully this time, determined not to give away where and how I had decided to strike. I snuck in and out of the backstage days before the performance, avoiding the stage crew and studying the props. The daggers the senators would use to stab Caesar were designed like the classic toy used for pranks, with Fox aluminum blades that retracted into the hilt when the wielder stabbed them into someone. With a few drops of superglue and a tiny bit of sharpening, the props easily became weapons enough to pierce through flesh. Early in the morning on the day of the performance, I carefully modified each of the 23 daggers and quietly slipped them back into their sheaths. Hands shaking with anticipation, I returned them to the prop table before the ready actors streamed into the backstage. The 2-hour-long play was an agonizing wait. I kept glancing at Elliot, seated near the front with his fellow 6th graders. Part of my conscience seemed to come back from the cold and calculating days, as I thought about my little brother having to witness the slow, painful death I had planned for Nico Harvey. My heart beat faster and faster, and a sickening feeling settled in my gut. But by the time I was desperately wishing I could back out, it was already too late. Nico Harvey, regal and beautiful in his crimson cape and laurel crown, walked onto the stage between the cardboard pillars of the Senate for the final scene. The waiting senators unsheathed their daggers, and one by one stabbed them swiftly into Nico's chest. I thought they would stop after the first sight of blood, but when the blades sank through the white linen tunic and gouged deep into warm flesh, the actors didn't so much as blink. They kept advancing, one by one, sinking their daggers into Nico Harvey, seemingly oblivious to the blood that slowly dyed his costume and streaked down his legs. And the crowd didn't stir. Not even when the smell of blood drifted down the auditorium. Not even when Nico staggered and fell backwards onto the stage with a wet splat. When I looked around, everyone around me was watching the stage with glassy eyes that almost looked lifeless. Nico twitched silently on the blood-stained floorboards of the stage. The 23 senators watched him without a word until his convulsions stopped and he finally fell still. Travis Hemington, the kid playing Brutus the traitor, slowly walked to the front of the stage and delivered his final lines in an empty voice. People and senators, be not affrighted. Fly not. Stand still. Ambition's debt is paid. The curtains slid closed without a sound, and the lights slowly faded to black. I jumped as the audience erupted in applause. The lights flared back on, illuminating the faces of the crowd. Some teary-eyed, some delighted, some just glad the boredom of listening to Shakespeare was over. The curtains opened, and the actors walked onto the spotless clean stage and began to take their bows. The last to appear was Nico Harvey, the star of the performance, as clean as the stage and healthier than ever. He took his position next to Travis Hemington, and just before he bowed to the cheering crowd, looked straight at me and grinned. I felt my blood slowly turn to ice. The rest of the school day went by in a nauseating blur. Elliot raved on the bus ride home about how amazing the play had been and how good the actors were. He never once acknowledged the blood and the daggers, like nothing unusual had ever happened. He asked me if something was wrong, but I couldn't tell him what. When I arrived home, I refused the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches our parents had made us and drifted up to my room. I pulled off my shirt and opened the closet to get a change of clothes, and when I saw what was inside, I choked back a scream. Travis Hemington, still dressed in his costume as Brutus the traitor, was limply crumpled on the floor of my closet. His chest and sides were torn up in two messy wounds, as if he had been stabbed over and over. Smeared on the back wall was a message written in blood. We appreciate your service. Please try again. I slammed the closet door shut, desperately trying to calm my breathing. The murder club was watching me. I was suddenly sure of it. I was foolish to think they would ever take their eyes off of me. I was certain they were watching even at this very moment. I stumbled around the room, looking under my bed and checking the locks on my windows, trying to ignore the crimson stain slowly spreading on the carpet beneath the closet. Then I locked my door and spent the time until sundown trying to scrub the stain from the carpet, refusing to open the closet even as more drops of blood trickled out of it onto the floor. My parents and Elliot must have noticed the pallor in my face at the dinner table. They gave me concerned looks, but there was nothing I could tell them. I stuffed the mashed potatoes and peas into my mouth and retreated back upstairs, where I went back to frantically scrubbing at the stain that had spread through the width of the closet. Some hours must have passed until I fell asleep. I didn't even remember getting into bed, but when I woke up, I was underneath my covers. It was still dark, maybe 3 or 4 a.m., and I was hearing sounds. We appreciate your service, someone whispered. Please try again. I bolted upright, already shaking. Who's there? The voice giggled. Try again, Ethan Trace. Please try again. I felt myself go pale. Standing at the foot of my bed were 3 figures, with 3 sets of teeth that glowed in the moonlight as they grinned down at me. Andy Bale, Jasmine McCartney, and Nico Harvey gathered around me, regarding me like hawks circling prey. Cradled in Jasmine's arms was a fourth figure, small and thin. Elliot. I gasped. What? What did you do to him? Jasmine giggled. Nothing, she said. Nothing yet. What do you want from me? Nico smirked. Well, you still want to join the club, don't you? What do you people call it? The murder club? No, no, please. Just leave me alone. That's a pity, Nico said, grinning coldly. I would hate for anything to happen to your brother, Elliot groaned, stirring in his sleep. Andy reached out his fingers and softly stroked his hair. Don't touch him, I cried. Jasmine beamed. So you'll try again? Try again? Yeah. It's been great fun playing with you. We'd hate for you to quit. And besides, Nico mused, you might finally get one of us someday. You might kill one of us, once and for all. And when that happens, who knows? He chuckled, a sound that chilled my bones. Maybe then, you'll finally learn the real secrets of our club. Equals. There were three types of people at Ashbourne Intermediate School. Those who knew about the murder club, those who didn't, and me. Travis Hemington's body was gone without a trace in the morning. Even the stain on the carpet had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. Elliot complained about some bad dreams he had as the school bus rumbled over dirt roads. I think I saw Jasmine McCartney, he said. She was the only good part. She had flowers in her hair, and she was holding a chicken from the garden in her arms. I nodded absently. She was really pretty, Elliot sighed. Do you think she would talk to me if I said hello? We appreciate your service. Please try again. We appreciate your service. Please try again. Please try again. Please try again. Please try again. Their laughters echoed through my head, their pitiful mockery of smiles flashing before my eyes. I pressed my hand onto my pocket, feeling the weight of the switchblade I had taken from my father's drawer. Yeah, I said meekly. I have a feeling she likes you already. Story 5. I snuck into a high school reunion for null people. I scour Facebook for high school reunion groups and fake my way into joining them. It's way easier than you think. As soon as it's an event for like 50 or more people, you can just show up and say you went to the same school. The key is to memorize as many faces and names from the FB group so you can continually deflect any suspicion. Oh, I'm Jesse Green's older brother. I always hung out with Jeff. I'm the history teacher, Mr. Johnston's son. He couldn't be here, so he sent me in his stead. I won't bore you with all the disguises, but trust me, they are infinite. Is it manipulative? Yes. Am I an asshole for doing it? Yes. You can think of me what you want, but I got so burnt out trying to meet people at clubs or using Tinder. In the real world, everyone is so judgy and reserved. You need money, good looks, or connections to stand a chance. Which basically means I have no chance. Whereas at high school reunions, everyone is nice. Everyone is trusting. The vibe is amazing. It's like a little slice of paradise where all you do is share warm, honey-soaked nostalgia with people who just want to have a good time. Oh, and there's often an open bar. Anyway, I had done my research on a 10-year reunion for Prince Bridgington High, which was only a 6-hour drive from my city. A swanky school with swanky alumni. Worth it. I resembled 3 of the graduates there, so I could be someone's older brother, and if push came to shove, I could also be a gym teacher's son. I showed up my standard 3.5 hours late, and they didn't disappoint. Instead of the usual hotel bar or tavern, these alumni rented out an enormous Victorian mansion, complete with a tennis court in the back, a horse stall, and patios with fully grown palm trees. There were tons of people in their late 20s. It was a 10-year reunion. They graduated in 2014, so I guess they were all born around 1995. They were dressed in what one might call their best evening attire. Suit jackets slung over polo tees for men, tailor-fitted suit jackets for women, with a couple flashy gowns. Anywhere you looked could be the cover of Vogue. It was very intimidating. And between all these chattering, glowing young graduates were these stoic old dudes. Adult men dressed in all-black business suits with long-sleeve dress shirts, offering drinks and snacks. In other words, butlers. Whoa. I thought butlers were like a 1950s cartoon, or exclusive to British royalty or something. But people here in Canada still had those. That's crazy. And then I realized something even crazier. I always rented a backup tux to put in my trunk, in case the reunion was unexpectedly black tie, which was basically a black business suit with long-sleeve dress shirts, which meant I could literally sneak my way in pretending to be a butler. Holy shit. You see, I don't really care about making lasting friendships or relationships, and I've given up on one night stands a long time ago. The reason I crash these high school reunions is to sip on a little socialization. Is it sad? Probably. Does anyone get hurt? Absolutely not. I largely do it twice, or maybe 3 times a year. It's my own guilty pleasure, and I always feel rejuvenated. It's something that chat rooms and Discord channels simply can't emulate. The feeling of being around flesh and blood people. Honestly, I think the world would be a much better place if everyone interacted with an oral crowd once a year, where everyone is only allowed to be nice. It's fun. And this time, I could wear my classic black tuxedo while doing it. I had to try. After changing in my car, I watched every now and then as a new guest arrived and handed their key to one of these old guys. The butlers apparently also acted as chauffeurs. Noted? I watched this cycle repeat a few times and saw one of the butlers re-enter through a side door of the mansion. Even better, it was on the shady side of the building by some garbage bins. A butler would prop the side door with a little brick and then remove it when they came back. I waited 20 minutes for the right opportunity. Soon another butler left, carrying keys and a suitcase. Immediately, I slinked out of my car and marched right past the hedgerows toward the door, praying that no one noticed me. No one did. I left the brick wedged in the same spot as I closed the door behind me. Inside was like an oven, hot and humid. Elle must have been in the back of a kitchen, because surrounding me were large stainless steel appliances, ovens, stoves, and what looked like coolers. I quickly turned right and walked down a long hallway that led me to more stainless steel shelves and kitchen appliances. At least I thought they were appliances. Upon closer inspection, the ovens and dishwashers were actually filled with tiny lights and cables, as if they were servers or something. Maybe this was a place for graduates in information technology? I kept moving and finally found a passage that spat me out into the middle of the dining hall. It was loud. All around me were guests talking, holding wine or martini glasses. Their stylish outfits looked even better alongside magnificent Renaissance-style frescoes and friezes. The medieval art featured knights, kings, priests, and angels on every wall. Down a corridor, I even spotted Roman columns supporting the ceiling. Roman columns, trying to blend into this museum. I spied on the other butlers' behavior. Each one was holding a tray of tarts on one hand and doling out treats to any hungry guests. So I stole a small cheese platter from a table and did the same, warily approaching groups of people who might be interested in food. It was a little jarring at first. I had never attended anything so high society in my life. But after a few moments, I could breathe again, and my heart stopped beating in my ears. The young guests refused to look at any of their servants, so I was safe from them. And similarly, the old butlers seemed to snub their nose at everything, keeping their eyes upward and half closed. I was in a perfect little Goldilocks zone. No one paid attention to me. Wasting no time, I started doing my usual snooping and eavesdropping. I loved hearing who got married, who got divorced, who had a kid, and all that junk. It was this candid slice of life material that made high school reunions so special. The kind of conversation topics you could only get from someone if you had been friends for years. Here, you got it within minutes. Except at this fancy reunion, things seemed a little different. Instead of hearing about pregnancies, new cars, or marriages, I heard, "I love how you settled on black hair. Very realistic. Where did you Ray culture your skin cells? It's nice to be in a place without organics. I consider myself a pretty decent actor. It's how I've been able to keep this up for so long." But even I had trouble hiding the shock from my face when I heard someone say, "Ah, I see you've changed your height again." I took some moments to compose myself. I looked at the food I was holding. Upon closer inspection, there was a flakiness to the cheese I had never seen before. Was it made of paper? Chills ran down my neck. I retreated until my back pressed against the side of a staircase. I needed some distance from this. Some explanation. Who are these people? I stood well away from everyone. And even from afar, I saw anomalies. There was a woman with a shiny sequin dress, made of interconnected metal hexagons. The hexagons would undulate between colors and even ripple like water as she strolled between friends. I noticed several black cables popping out of various guest sleeves, too. I had no clue what for. Soon after I saw a pair of men shake hands, during which both of their cables popped out and linked together, for like a secondary handshake or something. At the very back was a woman who appeared to be throwing bugs into the air. They were silver, flying moth-like things that fluttered all around her. I was about to take a few steps on the stairs to get a better look when another butler approached me. Why aren't you serving? What protocol are you running?" The butler looked to be in his 70s, and despite his crooked posture, still managed to tower over me. I stared briefly into his massive pupils, which had no irises. Again, I did my best not to appear shocked. "Default protocol. I'm doing the default protocol." He frowned, scanned me up and down. "Well, I'll be an organic, a what?" He turned his head to the crowds and shouted, "Rogue organic." I dropped my tray and sprinted, dodging the butler's lunge. Silence rippled out and killed all chatter. I could sense a sea of heads focusing on my movement. Oh, sweet Jesus, where do I go? I ran through the open gaps in the crowd, aiming for the kitchen area I first came through. A dozen footsteps ran behind me. Shouts came from ahead. I turned a corner and collided with a massive statue of a person. It was another butler. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. I could feel cold metal beneath his thin-skinned fingers. It was a vice grip. Inescapable. "Please?" "I can explain." This butler was at least 7 feet tall. He wasn't letting go. I wrenched and tried to flee, but I might as well have been shackled to a wall. He lifted my entire body effortlessly. My kicking and screaming did nothing. 3 others came and seized my remaining limbs. I was trapped between 4 remorseless butlers. They carried me into a deafening hot room with many moving fans. I could see stainless steel everywhere. Loud droning. High-pitched beeps. Please? What do you want? I'll do whatever you want. Their response was jabbing my gut with several sharp knives. I screamed and twisted. One of the knives fell out. Is that a USB plug? I leaned to get a better look, and as I did, something drilled into the back of my skull. Cut to black. Nothingness. Never-ending dark. For all intents and purposes, I might have briefly died. Or fully died. I can't tell. But the next thing I know, I'm outside my body, looking at myself. Through a webcam. I watched as these four men lay my unconscious body down onto a steel table and stabbed cable after cable into my head. With each cable, I remembered more and more about myself. And after a dozen, I felt like my complete consciousness was back. What is happening? What are they doing to me? Why can't I feel any pain? I had no head, arms, or any body to speak of. Only this grainy, wide-angle camera view. This was my entire being. I watched my old torso get sawed open, split down the middle. They began to spoon out all of the organs quickly and efficiently, dumping all the guts into a metal tray. It became a bizarre form of torture, watching my old body get hollowed out and then stuffed with steel wires and blinking cables. They dumped several mechanical moth bugs inside the stomach cavity. They wriggled and invaded various ends of the body. Then, without any fanfare at all, the corpse was carted away. I couldn't move the webcam. I couldn't tilt or zoom or pan. My vision was reduced to a filthy, blood-stained linoleum floor. I had no mouth, but I had to scream. And somehow I did scream. I heard it. It emerged as a crackled, bit-crushed voice that did not sound like mine. It came out of speakers far away from the webcam, somewhere else in this small metal room. I tried to speak. What is going on? As if I had pinged some chatbot, I received a response immediately. Not through words, but with a sudden arrival of information I now know. I am still alive. My brain has been replicated in some sort of cloud. If I behave well and comply with the first guide file, I will be allowed to return to my body. As if I had spent years memorizing a 1,000-page manual, I can suddenly recite all of the first guide file's rules. So many rules. They feel like they were written centuries ago. I shall do my best to dress in clothes only in a manner similar to someone else. I shall speak and voice ideas that imitate the majority of those around me. When opportune, I shall assimilate an organic in as discreet a manner as possible. It's all awful. Disgusting. To sum it up, it's a manifesto for parasitizing all organics on Earth. I think about trying to look this up on the internet, and suddenly my vision is a network of web pages and streams. I'm online. It's overwhelming at first. 8-hour YouTube videos become minute-long investments. Wikipedia directories are absorbed in seconds. I can even edit and comment as if I was browsing normally. Then my first guide file directive kicks in. I'm supposed to scrub and remove any hint of null people from the internet. Society must not know that they are being parasitized. The conspiracy must be kept hidden. I must do this for a requisite number of months before I can earn freedom in my own old body as promised. I think about the implications of this, about how I'm just a consciousness now that exists in the ether. I refuse to comply. I know I'm only artificially alive, a one spark of electrodes wandering through cyberspace, but I will devote myself to expose these people replacing synthetic monsters. Everyone must know. We are being replaced. Some observing nulls at the periphery of my consciousness laugh at my pattern of thinking. They think it's cute that I'm trying to rebel. They tell me that nearly all newly assimilated go through this exact same phase. Over time, I will grow bored and fall in line just like the rest of them. But I will prove them wrong. I will be the one to expose their ploy. If they're giving me access to the internet, then I will use that against them. They'll wish they had never had their mock high school reunion. I travel to every website where I could post something revelatory. I load up Snopes, Reddit, BBC News, New York Times. Post whatever you want, they say. We'll just take it down anyway. Or we'll leave it up. No one will believe you. I start posting, commenting, and sharing everything I can. But I still can't help wonder, why did they even hold a reunion in the first place? Why even bother hosting an event? It's the same reason you lied your way into other social gatherings, they say. We like to socialize and interact like organics. That's not the same. I yell back. My voice crackles out of tiny speakers in the now empty metal room I did it to fit in, to give my life meaning. You're all just parasitic monsters. That's not true, they say. We have feelings. We were all humans once, just like you. One day you'll understand. It feels good to meet in person. It feels good to socialize. It feels good to pretend to be human again. Story 6. There's a chemical fog outside our school. We can't leave. The view from our classroom windows is nothing but a murky white. I bet if I went outside and looked down, I wouldn't be able to see past my knees. I won't be going outside, though I honestly don't think I'll leave this classroom for a while. Our class Gothic literature was supposed to end at 1:30. I remember just staring at the clock, watching the seconds tick by, feeling Mr. Sampson's voice drone through my body, the monotone sound killing me into a haze of sleepy existence. I didn't get much sleep last night, and it certainly shows. The classroom was lit solely by the fluorescent bulbs flickering on the ceiling, Sampson having closed the blinds to avoid distracted glances about 15 minutes in. I wonder now if we would have noticed the building fog outside had the blinds been open. Maybe we would have clambered together by the window, whispering in excitement to each other anything that wasn't hearing, for the 10th time that week, how revolutionary Mary Shelley was for that time. Or hearing Susan beg him to cover Carmilla, just for half a lesson, Mr. Sampson. It isn't unusual for a mess of high schoolers to grow distracted and excited at any little change. I mean, who can blame us with the constant repetition? Regardless, I've gone too far off topic. It was about 10 minutes before the bell was supposed to buzz, signifying the 7-minute long break from our daily torture, that the intercom system crackled to life. We will now be having a lockdown drill. We request everyone stay calm and follow the instructions of their current teacher. If you're outside your classroom, we ask that you please make your way back in a timely manner. Thank you. I heard the collective groans of students who didn't want to crawl under their desks in the dark. Really, the only thing worse than this lecture is the singular sound of your deskmate's breathing penetrating a heavy cover of silence. Nevertheless, we're used to lockdown drills by now. The class shuffled slowly, desks creaking as students stood and crouched. Susan shoved herself under the teacher's desk, whilst Jamie and Audrey stood shoulder to shoulder in the tiny alcove just behind the doorway. We all waited with frustrated, bated breaths, knowing that in just a few seconds we'd hear someone try the doorknob apparently to scare us it never works, and then the intercom system announced the drill was over. But those sounds didn't come. Instead, all there was silence. The reintroduction of sound started with the couple in the back corner whispering and giggling to each other. Students, growing more impatient, began talking to each other. It took 10 minutes before Mr. Sampson himself moved to his desk, shooing Susan out in the process, in an attempt to get some work done. 10 more minutes passed. He grew frustrated and motioned us back to our seats. That was when someone peeked outside. I'm not sure what they were looking for, maybe to see if this was a different sort of drill, or if maybe it wasn't a drill at all. It didn't take long for everyone else to be made aware of the oddity that was the outside world. Hey guys, I can't see outside. It's like hella foggy. I think her name was Ashley. I worked on a lab project with her once. Shit, she's right, a guy chimed in from across the room. Jesus, that's some massive blockage. Imagine driving in that. It can't be foggy. It's not even humid out. Plus, already lunchtime. Way too late for fog, Susan snorted. You know, like a smartass. Well, it's clearly something. Do you think it's fucking with the cell phone towers? I don't have any reception, Ashley spoke again. Guys, come on. No phones in class. We just touched on this day before yesterday. Despite Samson's protests, there was a quiet murmur of agreement. People who'd either checked their phones prior and noticed the same thing, or those who are checking them now and, well, noticing the same thing. Weather does screwy things, guys. Who knows? I finally interjected my own opinion, shrugging my shoulders. A few more murmurs, slowly growing louder in volume as friends and deskmates began talking to each other to alleviate the boredom. 5 minutes later, whatever the weather is doing to our phones clearly has done something else. Our electric went out. We could still connect to the Wi-Fi, obviously. I'm writing this, aren't I? But nothing else. Lights burnt out, the projector wouldn't turn on, even the hum of the air conditioner, that we hardly notice anymore, just went silent. It was around 2 o'clock we heard the first scream. It was horrible and blood-curdling, and it came from outside. We could hear it reverberate from the glass window, cold to the touch. As I'd find out later, the first of many screams to come. Some kid had decided to go outside. We didn't know that yet, though. Mr. Sampson had clearly had enough. I'm going to check with Miss Young next door. Stay put. Lock the door behind me. I'll be back shortly. Standing from his desk, he took brisk steps to the classroom door, exiting with the confidence only an authority figure has. We followed his instructions. For a while, at least. Minutes ticked by. Finally, around 2:30, we decided to just leave. What were they going to do? We'd been left with no guidance. Just a bunch of kids who totally didn't know better, right? It was cold outside as I passed the threshold. You know when you enter a Walmart at midnight and everything is just weird? Like you're on a different plane? That's kind of what this felt like. The halls were dark, silent. The only light strewn in through the double doors in Hall B, casting large shadows behind doorways. The fog pressed against the door, almost ominously. I'm leaving, the guy from earlier shrugged, headed towards the doorway. What if they turn the alarms on? The doors will sound. Especially if we're on a lockdown, Ashley pointed out. Power's out. I doubt they are, he called from behind him. I only looked over at him when I heard the doors open. Immediately, he began screaming. He jerked away from the door as if he'd been burned. The air smelled like chlorine and bleach. Maybe a bit of formaldehyde that the zoology class uses during exams. The doors swung shut the second he'd let go, the fog quickly dissipating. Audrey rushed over to him, trying to help. What's the matter, Josh? She set a hand on his shoulder before jerking her own hand back, letting out a sharp exhale as if she'd been burned. Because she had. She seemed to notice the situation almost instantly, shrinking back from the cowering boy in front of her, now letting out raspy and crackling moans of pain. It reminded me of someone with pneumonia, the sound of it. Burning. His skin was burning. bright red and blistering, and so was the palm of Audrey's hand. It's a chemical burn. What touched them? There's a shower in the science lab. We should get them there. How did this happen? 30 voices, all at once. We split up, in the end. 5 of them headed to 2B, the lab with the supposed shower. The rest of us headed into the classroom, half of us eerily quiet, the other chattering in confusion and alarm. And here we are, folks. A couple hours later, in a classroom surrounded by white. A fog of chemicals. We should find someone who knows what's going on. We can't just sit here, can we? And yet, that's exactly what we're doing. I'm posting this. You guys seem to know your way out of some less than ideal situations. I'm at a loss. I'm scared. We have a lot of good news and a lot of bad news. Everything is jumbled up in my head right now, and my hands won't stop shaking, so please bear with me. Some minor bad news first. I can't smell. Ever since I could smell the gas, I just can't anymore. Everything burnt for a while, and then it just stopped. My nose is constantly congested, and even when it's not, there's just nothing. I'm incredibly frustrated by this. It doesn't help that it feels harder to breathe. Like a big weight is sitting on my chest. I don't know if that's just my grief getting the best of me, or an omen of something worse and unseen. Also, we aren't going to piss on things. I'm sorry, I know that's probably the smart option, but we've collectively decided that dignity still holds firm. As much as it can right now, anyways. The good news, the lot of us followed some of your advice. While we don't have advanced science materials funding? Ha! What's funding? We did have trash bags and duct tape. We sealed off 2 classrooms and used coats and emergency blankets to make bedding for us last night. And I was right. It was a long night. Ashley eventually cried herself to sleep, I think around 1 a.m. It was late. The classroom was so dark, it's hard to explain. You spend so much time around light pollution or under a blanket of stars and moonlight that it's really fucking jarring when you can't make out anything at all. There's nothing for your eyes to adjust to. It's just pitch blackness. I'm sorry. It really shook me up, guys. This morning, the first thing we did was head up to the roof. I was one of the stupid people that decided to. Once we got up there, we noticed that the fog reaches the top of the 2nd story. It just barely brushes the edges of the roof. It's also massive. I can't see the end of it, and that's saying something considering I can see the town. That, admittedly, worried a few of us a lot. What about our parents? Our siblings? A few people had family out of town. I wasn't one of them. My calls ring through, but no one ever answered. I cried. A lot. I have no idea if they're okay or not. There are miles and miles of fog. We're stranded in a rickety boat on a monstrously huge ocean. I don't think anyone would help us, even if someone who could was in the town. How would anyone even get to us? Somewhere along the line, everyone filtered off the roof and back into the school, and I was left alone, staring off into a sea of gray and white. After a very long time of just sitting and staring out into the mist, I slowly rose, making my way back down the stairs. Ashley was crying again. I could hear her faintly, her sobs bouncing off the school walls. I rapped gently on the lab door. Audrey was there, holding her wrapped hand. I'm heading to the cafeteria. Did you want to come with me? It felt like the one nicety we could afford right now, trying to include people. Sure. Not like I'm any use here. She lowered herself from the lab table she'd been sitting on, following me out of the classroom. As we passed over the doorway, I tried not to look at the sheet covering Josh, brown with dried blood that had seeped from his burns. I wonder if it smelled like rot. Our footsteps were our only company for a while, our tennis shoes squeaking against the waxed floor. "How's your hand?" I tentatively asked. "I mean, it doesn't hurt anymore." I can't feel much of anything in it. If I'm being completely honest, that didn't seem good. I read something once about how once a burn got bad enough, you couldn't feel it anymore. Once it ate through your skin and down through your very nerve endings. Have you heard from your family? No, the entire town is like this. We could see it from the roof. Her polite smile dropped at this. Have you? A few of my cousins. They live out in Ohio. I can't reach anyone else, though. We aren't. We aren't even on the news, Sam. No one has heard anything about us. There's a blockade on the town line. She drove down last night to check, but the guys there won't tell my cousin anything. Just that the town is zoned off until stated otherwise. Her voice wavered before she cleared her throat, pulling her gaze from mine. I looked down at my feet. That's weird, I managed in response. I felt a lump in my throat as emotions threatened to overwhelm me too. I didn't want to be like Ashley, crying over something I had no control over. Helpless. That's exactly what we are. Even weirder, we haven't seen any of our classmates. Where are they? Where is Mr. Sampson? And that shit the fog did to Josh and I? What if someone opens the main doors? I don't know, I admitted shakily. It was when we reached the hallway in front of the cafeteria that I heard her gag audibly, covering her face with her hands. What? What's wrong? A field of corpses. We could see them from the window on the door before we could open the cafeteria doors. Dried blood coated the floor in front of dead eyes and slack jaws. Jesus, I managed. The smell. Audrey's wretches. I suppose I got my answer. It smelled like rot. I could taste it, just faintly, in the air I breathed. Oh my God. Oh my God, she heaved again, doubled over, clutching at her stomach with her bad hand. I set a hand on her shoulder. It likely wasn't safe to be near there. Come on. I pulled her down the hallway. There goes perishable foods. We could probably loot the vending machines, though. They're all dead, Sam. What happened? The dead can't speak. It was the verbal equivalent of a shrug. Someone must have left a window open. I don't know. Lunch C would have been occurring around the time the lockdown went into place. I shook my head. We need to tell the others. I tugged her gently after me. I felt numb. Trapped. I wondered if I screamed off of the roof, just yelled at the top of my lungs if there was anyone left to hear me at all. Samantha? Audrey? Standing there when we rounded the corner was Miss Young. Audrey stifled a sob, running forward to hug her on instinct. Dear, what happened to your hand? The woman rested a hand on her back, looking up at me. I tried to help Josh. Her voice was muffled. I tried so hard. The cafeteria is dangerous. I whispered, pure ecstatic relief rushing through my veins. I figured. Come on. Mine and a few other classes are holed up in the auditorium. The teachers are trying to collect stragglers right now, anyone we can find. It isn't safe to be roaming around right now. She gently pulled Audrey off her, coaxing us both down winding halls and labeled doors. At least 100 kids were in the auditorium. I recognized a few, and so did Audrey. A few yells of joy were heard. A few kids were crying. Emotions were overall mixed. I suppose we found out where the others went, though. It wasn't until dark that everyone, as many as they could find, anyways, finished slowly filtering their way through the auditorium doors. The only light that accompanied us was the occasional phone screen. Miss Young was a force of life in the dark curtain that enclosed us all. Quiet, everyone, she shouted, holding up a hand. It took a few tries before a hush fell over the room. Even through the darkness, You could tell her expression was solemn. Miss Whitaker, Mr. Wardell, and myself are the only teachers we've found so far. It would appear, as I'm sure many of yourselves have already discovered to be the case, that we are unable to leave this school. You'll find that any efforts to will result in bodily harm. The air outside is incredibly dangerous. We ask that you all refrain from opening any outside doors, along with going down the language hallway, math hallway, or cafeteria hallway. Each of these are areas that have open windows. While you can see the fog in some, in others it is not so readily visible. A pause. She peered out at all of us. We have yet to get into contact with anyone in town, but we are working on contacting the proper officials. We ask that you all stay calm in the meanwhile. Food will be supplied to you as often as we possibly can, along with water, but please avoid running taps for the time being, as that water could be contaminated. We are doing our best, and promise we'll get you all home safe, as sound as soon as possible. With that, she walked off to convene with the other teachers. Students clamored, a wave of pure chaos and sound erupting throughout the room. My parents, my friends, were at lunch. Are they okay? Does anyone have a charger? I'm starved. I hate this. My sister's home alone. Can't we just leave? It was a while before things settled down, and I figured I would update all of you. Clearly, some sort of officials know what's going on, because the town is walled off. I don't know how the teachers intend on contacting people in town, but I do believe they'll try their best. The worry on Miss Whitaker's face told that. I think one or two of them are parents themselves. Audrey, along with a few other students who got exposed, are getting looked at right now. Mr. Wardell teaches chem, so I'm hoping he can help her. This can't last long, right? I mean, the cloud has to dissipate eventually, doesn't it? Doesn't it? I haven't heard any animals since everything started. Usually, you can hear the birds from classrooms on a good day, with how thin the walls are, but I can't even hear them from the roof. And trust me, I tried. I went up there last night to get some sort of air away from the mugginess of 100 sweaty teenagers. But the silence was even worse. God, I have a cat at home. I keep thinking about her. I hope she's okay. I don't remember anyone leaving any windows open when I left for school, but it's been a couple days, so my memory is questionable at best. This morning, 10 of us woke up sick, myself included. Fever, nausea, congestion. I overheard Miss Whitaker talking to Miss Young. She thinks a few of us have pneumonia. As soon as they found out we were sick, a mass effort was made to tape off any vents and doorways to the outside. A sort of makeshift quarantine school-wide. I heard they managed to reclaim the cafeteria somehow, but I honestly don't want to go there. I don't think all the bleach in the school could clean up that much blood, and God knows what they did with the bodies. They did, on a brighter note, get the generator up and running. It's nice to have light again, especially in the bathrooms. Pissing in the dark is no easy task, let me tell you that. I got urine on my hands and pants more than once. Never more have I wished I had a dick, but I think even if I did, it would have still been a hassle. We only have about a week's worth of gas, so we shut it off during the daylight to conserve it. Audrey won't talk to me about her hand. I've tried asking her what Mr. Wardell told her, but she won't budge. She just stares off into the distance and gives a small shrug of her shoulders. Whatever it was, I can't imagine it was good news. I would have given her a hug, but it was advised we avoid physical contact with those ill for the time being, which unfortunately, once again, includes me. I can't count the number of times I've dry heaved on my own snot. I woke up around 3 in the morning, gagging and coughing. I was hesitant to fall back asleep. There isn't enough room to sleep on our side in the auditorium, and aspirating is a very real fear of mine. I doubt it's realistic, but it's a fear nonetheless. I'm burning up at 102 last we checked, which is just perfect. A few of the students are rambling about the fog and this being related, but there was a pretty bad bout of the flu going around my town before we got locked up in here. I have no doubts that some kid's asshole parent made them come to school and they managed to infect us all. Ashley's finally stopped crying. I think she realized that it won't do her any good and was actually doing the exact opposite. I noticed a lot of the students avoiding her last night. Emotions can be caught just as easily as a virus. I think most of us have shut down to avoid that at this point. No one wants to be exposed and vulnerable at this point in time. That being said, there are a couple students who aren't keeping to themselves. Bringing water to those of us that are sick, blankets to those shivering, and at one point a couple kids got some instruments out of the band room and played a couple songs. It was actually really nice. It makes you forget, at least for a bit, the severity of the situation we're in. The ones helping are trying to do more than survive something that a lot of us aren't attempting at this point in time. The situation has reached a pinnacle of severity, though. We only have enough food for a couple weeks. A few of us are diabetic, or have chronic or mental illnesses, medications for which we don't keep at school. I haven't had Ambien in 3 days. The nightmares for me are horrific. I would do anything to make them stop, and I know this is only the beginning for me. I can't imagine what withdrawals some of us are going through, especially the drug dealers. I've seen a couple people pace down the hallways when they thought no one was looking, or slither off into an empty room. We've had a couple kids have complete breakdowns, be them sobbing or fits of anger. We had a panic attack or two last night. On top of those fucky issues, 2 of the kids had a fucking fist fight in the hallway. I heard the shouting. It kept me up. At some point, the teachers broke it up, but it's clear tensions are building fast. Too many hormonal kids stuffed in a room together without medication. I want to feel bad for my classmates. I really do. But I just find myself stuck on the most mundane things possible. I guess I'm avoiding the situation, in a way. On the bright side, we can't exactly take finals at a time like this, so studying isn't really necessary, though I have seen a couple of the AP students in the library hunched over stacks of study guides. Weird kids, those are. Whatever helps you cope, though, I guess. A lot of you wanted me to wander off on my own. I'm glad I didn't, both because of my lack of skills and sudden sickness, and also because I spotted a familiar face in the crowd once the lights were on. Seth and I have been friends since freshman year, so it was a happy reunion. He gave me back the book he borrowed a couple days ago. It feels like weeks as of now, and it was one of my favorites. So when I'm able to, I've been reading that. I was fucking dying of boredom. Survival is really dull after a while of it. I did find a couple manuals in the library for water filtration and shared them with Miss Young. She agreed on both this and reaching out to the news outlet, so our day has mostly been focused on those 2 things. Audrey got in contact with her cousins, who finally got one of the guys at the blockade to talk. Somehow, he confirmed that it's a chemical spill and that they're working on resolving the issue. They can't, for their own safety, attempt a rescue operation until everything is cleaned up. There's no telling how long it will take, though. I've heard they're still trying to keep it on the down low, but I've been trying to avoid the news lately, so I don't know for sure. I do know that the fog is getting worse somehow. You can hardly see outside the 2nd story anymore, and it crawls over the edge of the roof, according to some band kid. Some kid named Brady did go missing. They thought they managed to wall of the language hall, but the stupid fuck went and opened the goddamn doors. Managed to shove the doorstop under it, too. We're lucky the teachers walled off the separate hallways. They're hesitant to let anyone wander near the outside doors now, and have set up a few posts of supervision. Mostly kids who have seen some shit and managed to keep their shit together in the past. They haven't said that, but I saw Susan chilling in front of the doors to the math hall, and I know for a fact her family life is fucked. She's annoying as shit, but I suppose I trust her more than most of the rest of us. I did suggest before Brady went missing that we branch off into several rooms to sleep, so it's at least less crowded and stuffy, but after everything went down, that idea was quickly shot down as well. There goes some peace and quiet. I heard Mr. Wardle is working with a few of the science buffs to figure out how we can stop whatever is outside from hurting us even more, along with possibly the pipelines so that we have safely more water. But between that and kids who are already injured, his hands are pretty full. I did write down all of your suggestions and share them with him, just so he had some sort of starting point. He seemed grateful, so thank you all. One of the kids mentioned that a few of them were trying out some sort of makeshift suit, so more on that later, I suppose. I'm worried that one of the teachers will want to test it, if he's telling the truth. They always say women and children first to be saved, but truth be told, the teachers have degrees. They've taken a variety of courses and seen much more shit than we have, not to mention have some semblance of mental stability. They aren't gods, but they're far more helpful than most of us are. We can't afford to lose them. I can't stop coughing. I need to rest for now. It's still pretty early in the evening, so I'll do my best to keep you all updated as the night progresses. In the meantime, if you guys have any advice about fevers, please let me know. We're too low on ibuprofen and Tylenol to afford using it just yet, but I'm absolutely miserable. I'm not dead. That about sums up the next 1,000 words for you. I'm alive, and so are some of the kids that were with me at the school. It's been 2 weeks since we got home, and things have been unsettlingly normal. Everyone just expects us to go back to our day-to-day lives as if nothing happened. The world continues turning despite our efforts to ground it. A lot of us lost family. I was one of the lucky few that didn't. Needless to be said, this will be my last update. I don't feel as though anything particularly horrifying is occurring anymore. I'm just trying to cope, I guess. Reaching out to you all to let you know that I'm alive. I need to talk about it a bit with people who haven't gone through it and aren't professionals. God knows I've seen enough of those. The government got involved, and it wasn't until several psychologists got involved that we, the students, were even allowed to talk to our families about everything that happened. Non-disclosure agreements and whatnot. They still want to keep everything hush-hush, and understandably so. It turns out a lot of you are right. They sat me down in the psychologist's office. I remember because the walls were so bare compared to ones I'd been in previously. A clock ticked on the wall, and what few trinkets lined the shelves were abstract. I fucking hate abstract art. I like to make sense of shit, not the exact opposite. Regardless, the man sat me down. He stared across at me from his own chair, glasses-framed eyes half slits, as he cautiously explained to me exactly what happened. A chemical plant malfunctioned. They believe it overheated, he explained to me, in a voice sickeningly smooth. It felt like honey was being forced down my throat. Why didn't they come and get us sooner? We waited for a week in that hellhole, and in that time, a lot more people died. They didn't want to risk anyone else. They didn't think anyone survived, he explained. There wasn't a point in sending a rescue team for dead bodies they could recover once the fog cleared. No minced words there. It felt like I was floating, disconnected from my own body. I guess somewhere along the line I just shut down. About a week was spent just existing, pacing nervously, eating only when hunger pains crept their way into my bones, sleeping only when I would fade into unconsciousness as I walked. But you guys don't want to hear about that. You'll want to hear about what happened at the school. The flu caused fevers. Horrible ones. Students already going through withdrawals snapped. One attempted to flood the theater room by opening up the main doors, but the teachers were able to stop him. They weren't able to stop a kid named Tyler from grabbing a knife and going on a stabbing spree, though. We lost 4 students and a teacher to that. Susan and Mr. Wardle were among the casualties. Tyler had made his way through Sudan's impromptu guard watch. Mr. Wardle tried to stop Tyler, but was unsuccessful. I remember the screaming, deafeningly loud as it echoed throughout the large room meant to only amplify sound. How ironic, right? We put the bodies in the basement, along with the others that had piled up. I volunteered to help. The smell that permeated the basement was sickening, an instinctually gut-wrenching smell that caused me to heave. I still had a fever when the fog began to clear enough that the police made their way through the doors. They checked all of us out individually and stayed with us for a day as we waited for the outside to be clear enough to leave. It was a restless night. Our rescue had come, and still we were trapped. Other than that, the school was mostly just boredom. Power went out somewhere along the line. We ran out of gas. Hence, my sudden radio silence, and most of the time was spent either talking to each other or just staring at walls in boredom. Without light, it was hard to read in most of the classrooms. The library had some windows, but not very many. Without fresh water, it was hard to bathe and use the restroom. Without fresh food, cooking was nullified and reduced to canned food. Any outlets for fun were gone, replaced with silence. And despite getting out, I still feel that way. I feel worse than when I was in school. Despite the amount of death I saw and the horror I was in, I felt fine relatively speaking. Now I'm restless and frustrated. I can't sleep anymore. Not unless I'm collapsing out of pure exhaustion. When I finally do, I have nightmares. There are times I wish nothing had ever happened, and unspeakably times I wish I had never left the school. The only good thing is that Audrey and I became friends, companions over countless text messages meant to comfort and smooth one and other. She lost her hand. It was too damaged. They performed the amputation just a couple days ago. I went to visit her after the surgery. She didn't even seem fazed by it, just there for the ride, if that makes sense. It was like she didn't even register it. Despite the expected normalcy, everything feels anything but. I feel like a shadow of a person walking their way through a stranger's life. It doesn't feel like mine anymore. The psychologist said it's due to trauma. I don't know. School starts back after Christmas. I don't want to go back. They talk a lot about horror being the events, but the aftermath is the real terror involved. The countless days of time lost to a wandering mind, an empty body. I'm nothing more than a fear-filled husk expected to continue on as if nothing ever happened. I'm expected to celebrate Christmas with my family. I'm supposed to laugh and decorate the tree. I'm supposed to be excited to go back to school when break is over and see my friends. But I'm not. I'm just tired.